Our story begins here, at this spot. This dilapidated old house sits on the same spot that the Sturgeon Hotel did in 1902. This was the scene of one of those tragedies that people talk about for years and years. This dilapidated, weather-beaten old house sits on the same spot where the Sturgeon Hotel was located at the turn of the century. The Sturgeon Hotel was built before there were any brick buildings, so if you can imagine it, there were no buildings between it and the railroad track. Indeed, you can see it clearly from the train depot where travelers arrived in our town. There was a welcoming garden in front designed to catch the eye of those travelers. Unfortunately for its owners, an act of kindness soon became the cause of nightmares and led to the abandonment of the hotel and also to the building that replaced it. In 1902, Lake City was on the cusp of becoming a boomtown. Since the railroad had arrived in 1854, the town had slowly become an important stop for the trains as they loaded up with agricultural products for northern markets. They were also delivering more and more goods to Lake City, such as mules, agricultural implements, and goods for the new merchants in town. The town itself consisted of around 300 people, 3 hotels, 3 mule stables, and more than half a dozen mercantile stores. Its main street was divided into East and West Main by a double set of railroad tracks with switches which allowed trains to pull onto sidings. With a continuous stream of trains passing through the town, the sidings allowed rail cars to load and unload without requiring the next train to wait. If you stood on the railroad tracks at Main Street, facing west, the first 2-story wooden building on the south side of the street was the Mercantile Emporium of Henry Nachman. Henry was a Jewish immigrant from a country that no longer existed, as Galicia had been absorbed by Austria just a few years prior. Henry had been a merchant in Lake City since 1890, was well established, and was a prominent and respected businessman. At 39 years of age, he was the father of 5 children by 2 wives. His first wife had died just 3 years earlier. His oldest child, Joseph, had just turned 17 and had begun clerking in his father's store. On the night of November 22nd, 1902, a Saturday night, Joseph left his father's store at around 8 p.m. and instead of heading home, turned toward the train tracks. There was a train on the siding. Jacob couldn't resist the temptation to climb on top of the caboose and jump from car to car. As he was playing this dangerous game, the train started moving back to the main track. Jacob, instead of dismounting, kept moving toward the engine. Starting at the back of the train, he jumped from boxcar to boxcar. As he began to jump from the 6th to the 7th, either he misjudged his jump or the train lurched and threw him off balance. The result was that he fell into the gap and onto the rail, half of him still under the train. 6 cars, that's 24 wheels, rolled over him, crushing his pelvis, spine, and reducing his intestinal organs to mush. Astonishingly, he lived through this horrible incident, and his cries quickly brought people to his side. Dr. Williams' office was just steps away, and he was called to help. Under his supervision, several men lifted Jacob, who was still conscious, with his 2 halves held together only by skin. Mr. Surgeon, who was also at the scene, suggested they carry him to his hotel, only 50 feet or so from the track. They put Jacob in one of the guest rooms where he remained conscious and lucid as he recounted the events of the night. At 11 o'clock, after 3 agonizing hours, Jacob called for his mother and died. Sturgeon's Hotel was both home and hotel to the Sturgeon family. After that night, it was never the same. Guests avoided it, claiming it was haunted by cries of "Mama, Mama." It wasn't long before the Sturgeons decided to sell the building to Van Epps, the local undertaker. Although not superstitious, Mr. Epps thought he had made a bargain as he tore down the hotel and built a funeral home. Yet it didn't turn out to be such a great deal after all. Bereaved families, as they watched over the body of their loved ones, soon began saying that they were hearing a boy's voice crying for his mother, which added to their grief and their stress. Mr. Epps had to move his undertaking business to another location. Today, the old funeral home still stands, abandoned, and haunted by a young man's plea for his mother, a woman who had died 3 years earlier. It's heartbreaking to think that he was not reunited with her at his death, and that this is the reason you can still hear his cry late at night as trains are passing by. Jacob's body was taken to Charleston, where it was buried next to his mother's grave. Yet it seems he is still seeking her.